All right, welcome to another episode of the Credder Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Palmieri, and with me today is Ed Bice. Ed Bice is the founder and CEO of Meedan, which is a technology nonprofit that builds software and initiatives to strengthen global journalism, digital literacy, and accessibility of information for the world. That's right off the website, Ed. Ed, thanks for being
Let's say
here.
that it's got a good ring to it. Can we use that?
Yeah, there you go. You can take that. So obviously we're here talking. It's been about a year since you and I last grabbed lunch and caught up, but how has this pandemic been treating you personally and the company and Meedan? How has it affected you all?
Yeah. Thanks, Chase. It's great to be in touch and talking with you again. So the pandemic has been a huge challenge for us. We're a globally distributed team. The glue that holds us together is, traveling and staff meetings that we hold in different cities around the world, and not having that's been really challenging. But in terms of our work, in 2018, my now colleague Nat Jenis flew out to San Francisco from Boston, and pitched me on a proposal for starting a digital health lab at Meedan. She'd been working on digital health misinformation projects for the previous 5 years, and came through the School of Public Health at Harvard. And we, having worked in the misinfo space for many years, we were looking for specific verticals to do deep dives in. So in 2018, Nat and An, my COO, co-founder, co-pilot, Nat and An authored a piece in Atlantic where they coined the term misinfodemic and talked about the threat of misinformation in a pandemic setting. So we started and were funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in 2018 to start a project that looked at how to respond and what the likely threat vectors were going to be in such a scenario. So when COVID rolled around, we were actually 6 months into a project on pandemic misinfo response, which is one of those moments where you look left and you look right and you're like, geez, I guess we better accelerate the schedule here. And so in that regard, COVID has been energizing in terms of our programs. We were able to bring more resource from Google News Initiative and Omidyar Network behind that pandemic misinfo response work, and we went out and brought together an incredibly talented team of epidemiologists and public health experts, and launched learnaboutcovid19.org in the very early days of the pandemic. So that team has been putting out information that is visible on that site, but is really intended as kind of a B2B resource. So and I think in our conversation we'll talk some about the fact checking program that we run. So we're providing that health expert content and what we really refer to as kind of context around some of the pressing questions to our fact checking partners who don't have health expertise in-house, and they then connect with their users, use our content. So Reuters, India Today, AFP, many of the partners we have are making use of this content that Nat and her team are turning out on a daily basis. So in that regard, you asked me a short question: how's the pandemic been? And the long answer is it kind of aligned incredibly with work that we were already doing, and I think for us has been, it's accelerated many times over what we hope to express with that work, and it's also kind of reinforced or it's been a great model for a theory of change around expert networks, structured data, the power of claim review, the power of structuring data against standards that are machine readable, and kind of impacting, seeing improvements across information ecosystem. So
Wow. And I actually was going to ask you about this theory of change. On your website, you have these, I think it was 4 pillars. 4 pillars or 4 timescales that you outline for your theory of change. Can you speak about those?
Yeah. I mean, the broader theory of change at Meedan is that we're all internet, like everybody at Meedan came to it because we're internet optimists, and we saw the kind of rise of mis and disinformation as an existential threat to the promise of a networked collaborative infrastructure. And we saw the need for programs and technologies that address that at the scale of single initiatives, like some of the election monitoring work that we've done in the US and abroad. So how do we get people together around a single event over a finite period of time to respond to targeted or misinformation or even just loose statements from politicians that need to be fact checked, and then at the scale out from that, we think about how that data gets structured in a way that might be machine readable, might surface higher in a search result, and might serve as training data for developing new technologies, new algorithms, and kind of at the longest time scale, we think about developing out the technologies that help groups of people do that collaboration work, generate that content, and hopefully have a significant impact on the quality of information that we're encountering on the web.
Yeah, and you said that, so you guys are doing work around this misinfodemic, which I think is a great term, and also doing misinformation around elections, not just locally here in the United States, but abroad. How are the misinformation that you're seeing, how is it different, the infodemic type of misinformation and the election misinformation? Are they similar in certain ways? Are there patterns? Is one a bigger kind of scale or threat than the other?
They're kind of, I think there are a lot of similarities, probably more similarities than differences. The rise of the kind of conspiracy theories and what I would, almost bordering on let me dive into one concrete example. So we did a project in India with a group of media partners and a lead partner named Proto, and the arc of the misinformation that they encountered through WhatsApp on a tip line that we set up, and we were supported by WhatsApp to integrate our software check into the business API of WhatsApp, and this since then turned into a major program area for us. But we set that up, set the tip line up, and started publicizing out with different media partners. This is a place, this is a number you can send misinformation to that you might encounter that's related to the upcoming general election. And we saw early on a lot of content that was coming through that was, does this politician, did this politician really say this? It's kind of stuff like, okay, great, we can address that concretely. And we saw through the arc of that election, more of that content turning more dangerous. We saw more hate speech surfacing. We saw, just really the kind of deterioration of the media landscape on WhatsApp in the run up to that election. And the project was, to its credit, was able to respond to a lot of that, but it was surprising to the journalists staffing that project that there was that arc where there was a lot of Islamophobia, a lot of hate speech, and the tip line almost became a vector for, and we had to develop the spam tools to deal with that. So I think that in each of these domains we see the value of fact checking and straightforward, honest questions about aspects of a vaccine protocol, something like this. We see, though, increasingly just a lot of garbage and a lot of conspiracy theory and a lot of junk, and with that, vectors of hate speech, and we see it all swirled together. So I think this is one thing that as we think about solutions and responses, whether we're talking about technologies or whether we're talking about programs, projects to address them, that we can think about misinformation as a monolith. But really, it's like the internet itself, right? It's a big swirl. And there are blurry lines between, a misspoken statement by a politician that tends to be, mostly not true, something classic fact checking scenario, and a crazy conspiracy theory, and a crazy conspiracy theory that grounds in some hate speech and really toxic content. And so we're kind of seeing, or I guess to go back to our theory of change, it's like the lines between classic fact checking, content moderation, and all that goes under that, including hate speech, they're quite blurry. And on any of these projects, we have a full arc across those. So we need to be able to develop tools that both protect the journalists and analysts, experts who are doing this work, encountering the content. And that means doing a good job of developing, what amount to email spam algorithms and routing protocols that push those off and put them in a toxic landfill labeled folder. So
Yeah, and how does a partnership with WhatsApp like that come together? I'm assuming you reached out to them or they reached out to you, because I know you've worked with those platforms in the past. But as a nonprofit, are you asking them to pay you or just to help cover the cost of
Yeah,
the
good questions. Great question. So the partnership with WhatsApp came about because during the 2018 Mexican election project Verificado, which was really kind of probably the most successful project we've ever been a part of, really high impact, fantastic partners with the AJ Plus Espanol and Animal Politico, and just a really great public response to that project. We were monitoring WhatsApp. We used the SMB app, which is not the API, and we had so much volume coming into that it actually broke. And WhatsApp took note. A bunch of people took note of that project. WhatsApp took note, and we were already in process building out a partnership for the Indian election. And they came to us and said, we've done an evaluation. We'd like to see your software integrated into the business API. We'd like to test out what fact checking looks like on WhatsApp. So that was, I think, the sequence there was do a high profile project, prove the value of how you're approaching the problem, get noticed, have WhatsApp come to you. And they did bring resource for development. So they didn't ask us to do pro bono work for them, which is good. And that initial engagement then set the stage for us doing the formal pilot of fact checking on WhatsApp, which began in October of 2019. So that project is now more than a year in, and it was renewed. So we now have 11 global partners working into our software, doing fact checking on WhatsApp. I think that the final frontier of misinformation is end-to-end encrypted networks. There is no content moderation solution that's viable within as a fallout from being an end-to-end encrypted communication space. So really, the only way to address I think it's rightly called a crisis. The crisis of misinformation in these networks is to have a model where you are asking users to share any content that they think deserves fact checking or verification through a tip line. So this is I think the only viable solution to misinformation in these spaces. And we've been really lucky that we've just kind of been working on this in this problem space since 2012, and we're right place, right time to be able to develop out the initial solution for this. I should add that since that pilot started, in the second phase of it was opened up to 2 other technology providers. So we no longer have our monopoly hold on fact checking or serving fact checkers on WhatsApp.
I saw that the IFCN got in there on WhatsApp as well.
Yeah, so IFCN is using a bot, and they're aggregating their fact checks into that bot and serving that out. So they're not doing express response to tips. They are responding to, you can add the IFCN bot and they had a U.S. election version. They've got a COVID version, and we're huge supporters, fans, proponents of the work the IFCN does. And I think that the bot that the WhatsApp bot that the IFCN has put out is a model for how bots and algorithmic responses can be fueled on the sorts of structured data sets that we're generating, and can have impact, that extend far beyond a single user sending a single request and getting a response from a journalist who's working on that.
Yeah. So it sounds like WhatsApp did well to step up and integrate some of these possible solutions. What about the other guys? I know, Facebook and Twitter get yelled at a lot for allowing certain amounts or kinds of hate speech and misinformation on their platforms. They were especially, in the doghouse after the 2016 elections. If you could give just social media in general a grade or a number that they receive for 2016 and then a grade for this election, how do they stack up from last election to this one?
Yeah. F to B minus, I think.
Yeah, that's something.
So, I think that WhatsApp and Facebook have been very aggressive in starting and funding fact-checking programs. Twitter has sort of been sitting on their hands a little bit, but I think in a really smart way. They've been kind of watching the missteps from the other platforms, and we're now starting to see. I think that Twitter's approach, which is serve context, is wise. I think that fact checks and Facebook's approach to showing related fact checks, when a link that's been fact checked comes up, it amounts to a context play, right? So it's trying to just decorate, not censor, but show context. And I think this is the big solution, and it's where we are placing our bets in 2021. So we're working on a project that we're calling ICI, or Information Context Infrastructure, to think about how what we've set up with these fact-checking partners and with civil society partners. So we have a whole set of users of our software who are in civil society. The MTAN network just used Check to monitor the election in Myanmar. And that was a lot of dangerous content, hate speech tagging. But information context infrastructure, it's a mouthful, is really our view of saying, hey, the internet is broken right now. It doesn't work. Censorship is a really awful option, given, just there's 1,000 reasons why a kind of regulatory response that comes from censorship that might be governed by administrations that are hostile, to fact checking, or a given human rights principle, as is the case in many countries around the world. That's just not a wise solution to the challenge of information quality and credibility, and that we need to think instead about how do we structure and serve context on top of content, and that's frankly a more durable and more flexible solution. Instead of taking content down, we think about, okay, how do we allow layers of context to be added to content, and then there's, it's not like problem solved at that point. You still have a ton of complexity around what signals do you want to pass through. IFCN is essentially a validating body that says these are respected fact checkers, they meet our criteria, and that's amazing. We need something similar in civil society space to say these are the trusted actors with regard to classifying dangerous content in Myanmar. And we need that same thing in Ethiopia, and we need that same thing, everywhere. But ICI might be a place where we can think about how that data gets structured, and think about how, in a machine readable way, and think about how platforms or even individuals might make use of those context layers as they're navigating whatever experience, whether it's a Facebook feed or, a Google search result, or, a Twitter feed. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Especially at Credder, we are not for down content. We don't think that that's the solution to misinformation on these big tech platforms. We agree 100% with you and the work you guys are doing, that hopefully Credder ratings will someday be able to be on those platforms and provide that additional layer of context or reputation or track record around the sources who are presenting the information, so that they don't have to pull the content down. So yeah, I completely agree. Why don't you tell us about this content moderation project?
Yeah, so content moderation project is headed up by my brilliant colleague, Kat Lowe, who's got a great mix of practical background, worked at Instagram, has been in the industry, and academic background. So has studied content moderation, and we received support from Swedish Development Agency and Facebook Journalism Project to do a deep dive. And so Kat spent the better part of 2018 and part of 2019 looking at content moderation practices, looking at establishing some durable structures and standards around how content moderation can be done across, in settings where there are content moderators on platform, and also third party, informal content moderation. And this is kind of that gray scale between work that's done in a formal setting with the kind of constraints and incentives that platform has to provide, the experience they want their users to have, along to affordances for the average user to flag, block, assess. Those are all essentially content moderation behaviors. So how do we structure standards and sane and flexible ways of expressing those moderation choices and behaviors in a way that we hope might lead to a web where we have signals coming in from individuals, signals coming in from organizations, and signals coming in from platforms themselves. So it was kind of an offshoot of some of the work that we'd done around the Credibility Coalition and thinking about standards there, but a very specific use case around content moderation.
Okay, and so this is an initiative, but so far no platforms have adopted it, or you're not working directly with anyone with that?
No, and nor do we think that at this point in that project that we're going to be, convincing the platforms to embrace markup standards that are being developed, by a nonprofit. But it's a multi-year project, and I hope that we can show the value, especially of civil society orgs working against standards to assess hate speech and other forms of harmful content, and across different languages as well. So this is a real kind of critical issue, is that a lot of the algorithmic approaches and algorithmic approaches that, by the way, have really spiked with COVID, right? Because they've needed more machine-based moderation approaches because they don't have the people in the seats. Those approaches are barely adequate in English and other majority Western languages, and you start to get outside of those major language groups, and algorithmic approaches to assessing and moderating hate speech are a disaster. So we really need that sort of, we need good data, and good data requires that we've got good standards to assess against.
Yeah, and I think a lot of US news consumers look at our media and our social media and see all of the misinformation or fake news, as it's been termed, and think maybe that it is restricted to only here. Can you speak to just how prevalent these issues are in every country and every kind of media organization around the world?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we started our work, Meedan started our work a long time ago with a base of operations in Cairo. And so the sort of recognition of, dangerous media, fake news, I think in many ways the West was the last, to discover like this has been de facto, true in a lot of the, air quotes, developing world for a long time, and the approaches that the platforms are developing to address this that involve algorithmic and data-driven approaches are just absolutely, they're dangerous. They're not just failing, they're dangerous because they have, implications for what content is being seen and what's not being seen. So,
yeah, it's definitely a very nuanced problem. I think a lot of people on the left right now, as talking US politics, it seems like the left wing wants more things taken down, and the right wing seems to want everything to stay up. And I know that that itself isn't a nuanced generalization because it's all over the place, but it is interesting that the kind of liberal take or the traditional liberals are somehow more than ever calling for censorship. Is that something that you see as well, or that worries you?
Yeah, I'm really worried by the fact that the politicization of fact checking, and the implication that I think that on the left, there is a sense that the right wing has, and especially the Trump defined right wing has kind of differentiated itself through conspiracy, and whatever I don't know where the New York Times was on their Trump lie count, but think it was north of 20,000 or something like that. That this is a movement that is not beholden to the limits of a true statement, and I think that's a really dangerous and divisive take on a political movement as anti-truth, and I think that the critique of fact checking that comes from the right is this is just where the liberal fake news press establishes their credibility, and with that assessment, they toss all notions of fact checking out the door, and I think we are very early on in the days of fact checking. I mean, the practice itself has long been something that happened unseen in the newsroom, with the fact-checking team looking over the copy of a given article that was going out, and just making giving it their thumbs up, not expressing that work at all. So as we now have just unimaginable amount of content moving across the internet, all of which is indexed, all of which is machine readable, and as we start to have fact-checking organizations coming online, Google promoting schema.org as a standard, claim review as a standard, to make sure that all of those fact checks are machine readable, we've got a great opportunity to create actionable context fact checks on top of any indexed sentence on the web. And against that, we have a narrative that no fact checks are to be trusted because this is a proxy for a fake news agenda. So in some ways, the political struggle over the practice of fact checking is a battle that needs to be won before we can see it having impact at scale.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that there is some justification to the claims that, well, if we're not going to believe what a news outlet tells us, how is believing the fact checker any different? It's just another kind of centralized body who's telling us what is true or not. So I think that there is kind of a natural instinct to associate fact checkers kind of on the same level as a publication. But hopefully fact checking and this context around posts doesn't become as politicized as, for example, masks were politicized in our country, because we saw how terrible that was. So I guess my last question, before I get to the two questions I ask every guest at the end of each podcast, my last question for you is about regulation of big tech. We're likely to see a Biden administration here. Does that make you think that regulation is actually going to come through? Is it more or less likely to come through? And if there was talk of regulation, would Meedan want to be working with regulators to kind of help frame that?
Yeah. Politicians tend to do and enact policy that is popular. And I think that outside of the boundaries of the South Bay area, that big tech regulation is a popular position. I think we're very likely to see regulation come down the pike. And I am not optimistic that it's going to be well conceived. I'm not optimistic that it's going to be well executed. And I think that we do hope to play a role in that conversation. I think there's some really brilliant people around our organization, Zeynep Tufeshi and Tim Wong, who are two of the really, I think, brilliant and thoughtful people with regard to this. I think in a best scenario, the threat of regulation it proves a incentive to the platforms to address some of the really egregiously broken pieces of their or I would say failings of their responsibility to users. I would hope that regulation looks first at the safety and well-being of users and looks seriously at the safety and well-being of the moderators, the paid content moderators, whose plight has been really well documented by a few tech reporters over the last several years. And I would hope that regulation also stops short of, trying to dismantle these platforms. At the end of the day, the value that we get out of Google search is proportional to the range of the index of that search, and if Google weren't able to index the entire web, it wouldn't be as useful. If Facebook weren't able to, allow any, user anywhere on the internet to participate in its social graph, it wouldn't be as useful, and, now, if Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook ended up being three different companies, I suspect that there would still be a similar ownership profile, and I don't expect that there would be a lot of social benefit to having those three indexes be separate. So short answer is yeah. I'm expecting there to be work on big tech regulation. I hope that I hope that we play a role in helping craft some of that, or I hope that we're involved in some of the conversations around that with the incoming administration, and I hope that ultimately those conversations are grounded in the well-being of end users and the people who are interfacing with this with the dangerous and hateful content on the web. So
that is such a more nuanced take than what we've seen out of the regulators so far. When Zuckerberg and Bezos get in front of them in these congressional hearings. So I really do hope that regulators come and work with you all when the time comes. Before I get to the last two questions that I do ask every guest, where can listeners go to follow your work or Meedan's work? Yeah,
so Meedan.com is the web address. The COVID project is at learnaboutcovid19.org. Our partners are all over the web at Boom, at India Today, at Factly, at Fishfast News, at Globo, at Estadao, at Agencia Lupa, at PesaCheck, at Africa Check. I've definitely left out a couple there, and my apologies, but we're serving partners that are doing Rappler, Bellingcat, Verifiles, Watching Western Sahara, Syrian Archive, Yemeni Archive. So we're serving a lot of heroic independent media partners and major media partners that are at the front lines of misinfo response. So that's where your users should really go to see our work. Yeah.
Okay, great. So here are the last two questions. The first question is Bitcoin. Are you a believer or not so much?
I do not attend the church of the cryptocurrency. I am a skeptic. I'm sorry.
Okay. Is there anything more to that you'd like to elaborate? Why you're skeptical, or what you would need to see to maybe be less skeptical?
I'm a huge believer in the need for a micropayments infrastructure on the web. I'm a huge believer in the importance of distributed ledger. I cannot abide an architecture that warms the planet in service of those.
Okay. The energy
and my friends on the inside with cryptocurrency assure me that there's a very small group of decision makers who are controlling the markets and controlling in ways that they themselves as cryptocurrency entrepreneurs are not entirely comfortable with. So warming the planet is a sufficient counterexample. I won't go to the conspiracy. Let me withdraw that conspiracy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No, great. And my last question for you today is, are we living in a simulation? Yes or no? I love that you have to think about that.
I'm gonna have to go for a long walk in the woods outside my office and I'll get back to you on that after I've had a few miles in the woods to think about that. No, we're not living in a simulation.
Okay. Well, Ed, thank you for coming on the Credder Podcast. It's been another great episode, and I hope all the listeners go and follow your work and follow Meedan. And I hope to grab that glass of wine with you soon.
Great. Sounds excellent, Chase.